The United States and Iran traded strikes once again this morning. President Trump telling Fox News the U.S. fired 49 Tomahawk missiles toward Iran, along with bombing by fighter jets, after saying earlier in the day Iranian leaders were taking too long to negotiate. The president also once again warned strikes could continue if an agreement is not reached. Iran, for its part, retaliated to the latest U.S. attacks by targeting U.S. bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan. Sirens sounded in Bahrain. Kuwait's airspace was temporarily closed, and Americans in Jordan were warned to take cover. There's also escalated tension in the Strait of Hormuz, which the Iranian military has now ordered completely closed to all vessels. Meanwhile, back here at home, President Trump continues to blame higher costs for Americans on the war in Iran, claiming the economic pain is only temporary. New data released yesterday shows inflation is outpacing workers' wages, rising to 4.2% over the last year, the highest level since April of 2023. The president then gave a pretty surprising answer when asked about that report.
Are you concerned, Mr. President, about the latest inflation number which came out this morning? Could that be a
No, I love it. The numbers were great. You know what I really love? I love the inflation. You know why? Because as soon as this war is over, I can say it now. Something you didn't know. Do you know we've been taking out millions of barrels of oil? Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran, until right now.
Inflation to come down between now and
when the war is over?
Yes.
It's coming down.
I know you can't.
It's going to come down like a rock.
Joining me here on set, White House columnist for The Hill, Niall Stanage. Niall, that is the kind of comment that I think Democrats, immediately, I don't think I know, they seized on it. But why would Trump say it that way? What's the deal?
I think it is his impulse to just put the best possible gloss on everything or attempt to do so. Of course, it can backfire spectacularly, as it just did there. A soundbite that is just terrible that, of course, Democrats are going to use. They're probably going to use it between now and November. And the other thing, Ali, as you well know, is that in politics, when you feed an existing narrative, that's particularly dangerous. And we've already heard him say affordability is some kind of Democratic hoax, that he doesn't think about Americans' financial situation when he's trying to negotiate an agreement with Iran. So all of these things accrete one on the other.
It does. And then also on top of it, it further solidifies, and this was already in the minds of Americans, higher prices linked with the war in Iran that Trump himself began. And so as if there wasn't enough pressure already to end this conflict, we're not only seeing a new escalation of tensions in the region, but now the president only adding more pressure to a situation that already needed an end in sight.
That's exactly right. And when you see the polls, you see how closely intertwined those two ideas are. I was reading a piece which mentioned an Economist poll, 62% disapproving of his handling of the economy, 63% disapproving of Iran, or vice versa, but almost exactly the same figure. And people seeing that linkage more and more clearly, especially when it comes to prices at the pump, which then, of course, filter through to prices for everything else.
It then spurs two questions that I think sort of ride alongside each other, right? The idea of, if the White House can't get a deal, what else could they do to try to assuage Americans that are clearly concerned about both of these conflicts? And then on the other side of it, does it push them into a deal that is not beneficial to the United States? I know that Trump has been also facing grumbling from Republicans who are like, we don't like the contours of what we're hearing because it has shades of the deal Obama himself negotiated that Trump pulled the U.S. out of in year one.
So to take the second point first, I think one of the things that has bedeviled this war has been an underestimation, actually, of the strategic power that Iran has. President Trump went into this thinking it was going to be another Venezuela, it would appear. You just topple somebody, you put someone else in, and away you go. That isn't what has happened. Iran has shown its strategic power, especially regarding the Strait of Hormuz, and now there's no easy way out. And the Iranians are very aware of the American midterm elections and everything else, all the pressures that creates. So I think that is a real problem when the underlying difficulty that is propelling these prices upward, and sometimes the stock market getting pretty volatile and leery about it all, that's an issue as well.
I think the other question, too, is as the White House is trying to find its way to basically land the plane here, you've got Republicans on Capitol Hill becoming increasingly restless about this situation. They are seeing the poll numbers as well. They are seeing the inflation data, not just because a reporter asked about it in the Oval Office. Everyone has access to the internet. And I wonder what you think the next few months portend as they start spending less time in Washington, more time back at home, and hearing from constituents at a more consistent clip.
So obviously the War Powers Resolution was the big exemplar of that very recently. And even though it was only a handful of Republicans joining Democrats, firstly, it was enough. But secondly, it was indicative of that kind of Republican discontent that you're referring to. Yeah. Republicans are listening to their constituents. This has been an unpopular war since its inception. It's not like past conflicts that have begun with quite a lot of support and then had that eroded. This has been unpopular from the get-go because I think most Americans don't see any beneficial linkage between the war and the issues that are affecting them in their day-to-day lives.
And the other thing I was hearing in the earliest weeks of this conflict was the ways that the White House never even tried to sell it to the American public. It got glancing mention at the State of the Union, started a few days later, and I think most people in the Republican Party were like, well, if they tried to sell it, couldn't we have started from a maybe higher position? That, of course, doesn't take into the account the way that Republican voters might have been thinking, well, I voted for the America First president who said I wasn't going to start any new wars, and here we are. But let's stay focused on the Hill for a second, because President Trump has laid out his demands for new Republican legislation, telling lawmakers to deliver a $350 billion reconciliation bill with the Save America Act included. That's that voting bill that he's been hot on. Trump outlined the request on social media last night, writing in part, quote, "No games, no delays, and no weak compromises. Let's do this ASAP." The legislation would mark Republicans' third attempt at a reconciliation bill this Congress, following last year's so-called Big Beautiful Bill and the $70 billion immigration enforcement funding measure Trump signed into law just yesterday morning. Those demands come one day after Senate Appropriations Committee Chair Susan Collins and Senate Appropriations Defense Subcommittee Chair Mitch McConnell both cast doubt on a third package, with Collins calling a third bill a, quote, terrible risk that is likely to create funding instability. Some lawmakers have also raised concerns about the controversial Save America Act, which requires proof of citizenship to vote, requires photo ID, and largely bans mail-in ballots, except in certain cases. Trump has been continuing to push the Save America Act, and I think it's reflective when you look at the Senate, just the realities there, that even though this is supposed to be a conservative red meat bill, they've attached some anti-trans language to it as well in an attempt to sort of sweeten the deal. And Republican senators aren't biting, in large part because they know the bill's not great, and also the political dynamics around it aren't either. But what does it tell you that he's now continuing to try to do this and potentially trying to pair it with the $1.5 trillion in Pentagon spending, which should go through a normal appropriations process?
I think what it primarily tells you is there is an appeal for him in any kind of process that does not require Democratic support.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that, frankly, he's too worried about the minutiae of it. He just thinks these guys will block me. How do I avoid that and get some sort of victory over them? The danger in that, without getting into the weeds of the congressional process, is that...
I love that.
Well, we can do it if you like, but it's like Susan Collins makes the point about the instability because reconciliation has certain terms attached to it, and it makes it a more problematic or fragile way of doing these things than regular.
It also is, they just came off of this $70 billion immigration package. Viewers of this show have heard me say before, that should have been a really easy package because it should have just been focused on funding the parts of the immigration system that weren't able to be funded through a different mechanism. Instead, it became this really complex morass that really frustrated a lot of Republicans and slowed down the legislating process, again, on something that could have been simple and they could have touted as a win. And so if you're 6 months less from the midterms and you're trying to focus on a third reconciliation package, what is the downside for Republicans? Do they end up going into this looking hobbled because they all can't come together on what they actually want to do here?
Well, they could do. I mean, for a start, there's always the danger of hanging extra pieces of legislation. And then there's a debate about whether you hold on to those pieces of legislation or whether you abandon them at the last moment to get the bill through, right? Mm-hmm. That's always what happens. Then you go back to things like the Save America Act, which is being sold on the basis of voter ID, which is, to be fair, reasonably popular. proof of citizenship is very different and much more divisive, much less popular, and that's going to be part of that debate as
There
well.
are also concerns when you talk about that bill about married women who have changed their names. Your birth certificate doesn't match your new name because you weren't born with your married name,
exactly.
right? I mean, so there's a lot of, when you actually dig into the details, there's a lot of confusion that this bill, which on its face sounds, okay, why wouldn't we? There's a lot of confusion when you actually get into the way that the bill is written and why Republicans, at the very least, want more time, but maybe don't want to pass it immediately. Nevertheless, this is clearly the thing that Trump is focused on. And John Thune, Senate Majority Leader, certainly has his work cut out for him in this moment. White House columnist for The Hill, Niall Stanage, thank you for taking us on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue.